In this lesson we're going to be looking at how we can create our first pivot table. So we got to the point in the previous lessons of looking at how we can use data ranges or tables as data sources for our pivot tables. So I've still got here my data range. This is not the version that we created into a table. And if you remember, we used our insert button and we chose pivot table. From this we were able to select our table or range, and we also wanted to put it into a new worksheet. So in this case I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to move it forward, and you can see now that our pivot table will open. And this is where we get to create our management reports and analyze our data. The other key thing to notice is that Excel has created a new worksheet. It is called it Sheet 1 for the moment. So our pivot table is actually created into two different areas. On the right hand side over here is something called our pivot table fields. Now what you'll see over here is that each of our fields from the data source has now been brought across. This means that it's very important that we name our fields in the data source to be meaningful. Otherwise we're going to have problems knowing which field of data we're working with in pivot tables and what does what. So just make sure that you've named all of your pivot tables to be meaningful. So let's create our first pivot table. So in this case, for instance, let's say that our sales manager wants us to be able to see what is our total sales by, say, country. So we have a country field over here. Now if we were to do this in a spreadsheet, we'd probably have to do some filtering or some sorting to be able to get a list of all our countries, and then we would do some subtotaling to be able to add up each of the options. In this case we work a little bit differently with pivot tables. So over here I have a little tick box. If I click on the tick box, because it's a text field, automatically the field is now put into my rows. What also happens on my presentation part of my pivot table is now Excel goes through the list of all the countries that are actually in my data source, and it pulls out each unique distinct item and will display that as the countries. So over here now I actually have 6 different countries that have been displayed. Now in this case, let's say I want to understand what is the total revenue by each of these countries. So in this case I can go down and I have my sales figure over here. So I'm going to use my sales figure. Again, I can click on that, and I can see now that my sum of sales is now being shown. And in my fields over here, my sum of sales has been shown under values. So values is really where I do my summaries or my aggregations. This is really where I work with my numeric information. So in this case over here, what we're going to do now is, because these numbers are not very easy to read, you can see we've got different decimal points. This has got 2, this has got 1. So one of the key things that you want to do quite quickly up front with your pivot tables is to sort out your number formatting. This makes your information much easier to read. So we're going to select one of the sum of sales fields. You can pick any one, it doesn't matter. And we're going to right click. It's very important that you choose option number 3, the number format option. Don't choose number 2, format cells. If you choose format cells, then the system will then just format the cells you have highlighted. It's much better to use number format, which will then format the field that we're working with. Okay, so we're going to pick number format. In this case over here we get our Excel formatting cells rules dialog box that appears. So in this case I'm going to use the number category. I want 0 decimal places, and I want to use 1000 separator. So you can see now the sample here makes it much easier to read this data. Click OK. There we go. Now we've got the sum of sales for each of our countries. Much easier to read. So working with pivot tables really gets us working with these different boxes here in terms of structuring our pivot table and the management information that we want to work with. So let's say for instance we want to ask a different question. Let's say for instance we actually want to see what is the total sum of sales by customer. So in this case I'm going to remove my country field. And what I can do is I can click and I can drag this, and as you'll see, if I take it across the spreadsheet it gets like a delete sign underneath the icon. I can drop it, and now it will be taken out of my pivot table. Now it hasn't been removed from my pivot table fields, it's just been removed from my actual pivot table box that we're working with. So in terms of rows now, I'm going to pick up my customer. So instead of ticking on the box over here, another method I can use is to use what we call drag and drop. So I'm going to click on the customer, and I'm actually going to then drag it, and I'm going to drag it down to the rows option. This then drops it in the rows, and Excel now goes through and actually now it calculates what is the total sum of sales for each of my customers. We have quite a lot of customers in our database here, so I'm not going to page through all of them. But hopefully you can see here, it's very quick and easy to be able to create easy reports in terms of the fact of asking questions about data. So we've just done a couple of quick ones. We've used country, sum of sales by country, or by customer. If we didn't want to use sum of sales, let's say for instance we wanted to know what is our total profit by customer. We can keep our customer field in a row, and this time we can take sum of sales out. So I'm actually going to click on this, I'm going to drag it out, and again you can see the delete sign. I'm going to drop it. In this case here now I'm going to pick up my profit field. I'm going to drop that into my values. Now because it's the first time the profit has been used on the pivot table, you see my number formatting has not been done. So again I'm going to select one of the items in my sum of profit. I'm going to select my number format. Remember the right click. And I'm going to choose number. No 0 decimal places. Use 1000 separators is normally quite a nice option. And there we now have our sum of profit by our customer. So in this lesson we've now seen how we can create simple pivot tables by being able to drag and drop into the different pivot table fields using the row and the values.